You are a little different though, Rick. Maybe I can use that someday. Evil Morty's dangerous! And evil!
He's gonna be coming for us, Morty. He's coming, fucker dimension!
Rick and Morty Season 9 decided to kick things off with a bang. They weren't playing any games. They know fans have caught on to Evil Morty appearing in odd number seasons, and decided to get it out the way with an episode that simultaneously feels more intimate than previous outings with the character, while elevating the scale through the help of insanely well animated action scenes, as we see Rick and Evil Morty fight together before fighting each other. Yet despite how hyped this episode was, if you've been invested in the Evil Morty storyline, then you probably can't help but to watch this and ask, does all of this really track with his character, working with Rick and clearly growing attached to him off screen? Or did the writers just ruin Evil Morty? Let's break down the episode and talk about it. And if you end up enjoying the video, then please be sure to throw it a like and subscribe to the roundtable with notifications on so you can stay in the loop with Rick and Morty. I'll down the hill that the show's been good again for quite some time. We start with a normal day at the Smith household, one that feels a lot more calm and upbeat compared to their usual antics. But these good vibes are derailed by Rick acting pretty sketchy after Morty catches him texting someone. It's obvious Rick does not want Morty to know who he's been staying in touch with, and you know there's a pretty narrow list of characters that could be hitting Rick's line that he would want to keep Morty in the dark about. Is it Unity? Those two were definitely in a weird place in their last appearance, and I could see Morty being judgmental about that. Or maybe it's Evil Morty, sworn enemy of our beloved duo. But come on, what are the odds of that? He hates Rick. He got into politics and became president of the Citadel in an elaborate scheme to get as far away as he could from any Rick. There's no way he'd be reaching at...
What the fuck?
So what's with the switch up? When we last saw Evil Morty in Unmort Rickin, he scanned the schematics for Rick Prime's Omega device after playing his part to take the bozo down. And quick refresher, the Omega device is a weapon that's capable of wiping out every variant of a person or thing across the multiverse just by destroying a single sample. At the time, Evil Morty had no desire to build it, as he'd just be creating more enemies, but it wasn't completely off the table. On his way out, he also remarked that Rick and Morty could be useful to him in the future, especially Rick, as he's proven to Evil Morty that he's different from all the other Ricks in the central finite curve. It's apparent that while other Ricks are extremely selfish, our Rick has softened up and cares about his family a lot. Evidently, Evil Morty finds that remarkable. Fast forward to this episode, and according to Rick, Evil Morty has been hitting him up and forcing him into adventures by threatening the family, which we could infer means he actually has created the Omega device. And despite this abrupt shift in Evil Morty and Rick's dynamic, I dig that it's an inverse of where Rick and Morty were at the start of the series, where Rick was the one forcing Morty into going on adventures. Another interesting development is the rivalry between Morty and Evil Morty. When Evil Morty just wanted to get away from the central finite curve and all the Ricks, it seemed like the two Mortys could develop a student-mentor relationship, but now that Rick is a part of the equation, we see the dynamic between the two Mortys devolve into mutual jealousy, which I believe started in Unmort Rickin. Witnessing Rick and Evil Morty collaborate to track Rick Prime caused Morty to get jealous of Evil Morty, feeling like they could have cracked the code without his help if he was smarter. Morty envies Evil Morty's high intellect and resourceful nature, feeling like this is the grandson that Rick really wants to adventure with. Meanwhile, Evil Morty is jealous because of the kind of relationship Morty has with Rick. It's something Evil Morty could never have, largely because our Rick is the anomaly in the multiverse, and even if Rick Prime is our Morty's biological grandpa, Morty still lucked out by having Rick crash land in the garage all those years ago. I love how you see traces of that student-mentor dynamic within this new one, as Evil Morty still invites Morty along for the ride, offering him some more experience with intense high-stake adventures, but he's also being vindictive and trying to make Morty feel like he's getting pushed out the door. Evil Morty definitely starts little broing Morty, treating him like a patron at Weenie Hut Jr.'s, whereas Evil Morty and Rick are hitting the salty spittoon on the regular. He wants to make Morty feel inferior and incompatible with Rick. We get to see Evil Morty's take on the Omega device in his lair, keeping passive and overly trusting versions of Rick, Jerry, Beth, and Summer hostage in order to force Rick's hand, which I thought was pretty funny. There's no Morty here because if a Morty gets erased, Evil Morty dies too, which he wants to avoid at all costs. He may be evil, but he's still a kid, and he's very fearful of death. When Evil Morty showcases the other variants of the Smith family out in the multiverse, we get a look at Doofus Rick, a Supreme Guard Rick, implying they're still out there somewhere in the multiverse despite the Citadel's destruction, Beard Summer, Cyclops Summer, Cyborg Space Summer from the Season 3 opening. I'm still holding out for her having an actual real episode despite it being nearly 10 years. We see Arbeth still chilling in the pool, the 5 o'clock Shadow Dimension Smith family with Paul present and accounted for. There's a couple more variants here, but these are the ones I immediately recognized and thought was worth addressing. The reason for this particular team-up gives us more context to Rick and Evil Morty's current relationship. An interdimensional entity known as the Collective is eating the multiverse, and he'll inevitably eat the central finite curve, which screws everyone over. It makes sense Evil Morty would want to protect the central finite curve, as if it's compromised, it'd risk all the Ricks can find inside it to trickle out into the greater multiverse, which defeats the purpose of Evil Morty getting away from the curve in the first place. Of course, there's also a hidden agenda where Evil Morty has finally warmed up to Rick and just doesn't want to see him go. In the car ride over, Morty calls out the awkward silence and asks if they usually talk when it's just the two of them, but Rick dismisses the concern and says they just talk about boring physics stuff, not realizing he's feeding into Morty's insecurity, reinforcing the notion that Morty wouldn't be able to comprehend or appreciate their conversations because it's science mumbo jumbo. Morty's also the only one who's forced to wear a protective suit, which is clearly belittling to him as he feels out of his depth.
Can he piss in there?
You can piss in there.
I won't need to.
While the Collective is a random-ass villain that's really just a vehicle for hype moments in aura, I think he's so dope conceptually, assimilating worlds like Unity, but with a sick visual aesthetic that cranks up the creepiness of it all to 11. Anyone who comes into physical contact with the Collective immediately becomes a part of it, altering the physical form of its victims to reflect its influence. Rick and Morty waste no time leaping headfirst into a confrontation with the Collective, and it's an absolute spectacle. This sequence was animated by Lighthouse Studios, a subsidiary of Mercury Filmworks who have animated a ton of other cartoons you know and love, and Studio Miyala. There's so much about the sequence that deserves praise, but if I had to pick one aspect I absolutely adored above all else, it's the colors. Everyone involved with this scene crushed it, but seriously, shout out to the color stylist. I've watched this sequence 10 times already, and the insanely fluid animation still takes my breath away, incorporating a lot of frame-by-frame hand-drawn animation, whereas the show is usually animated with rigs. This clash with the Collective really doesn't do Morty any favors in feeling secure, as he's constantly in peril and getting bailed out by Rick and Evil Morty. I love that they hold down the fort while still prioritizing Morty's safety. Might be a sign that Evil Morty does value Morty Prime. After defeating the Collective by having it absorb a compression algorithm, forcing it to absorb itself until it implodes, we see what Rick and Evil Morty's post-adventure routine looks like, and it's pretty mundane. They just grab a bite and spend time together. Rick tries to continually downplay their dynamic by saying they could stab each other in the back at any time, and nothing they get into is that big of a deal, but obviously it's not nothing, as when Rick claims he's running to the bathroom, Evil Morty takes advantage of the alone time with Morty to start rage baiting, rubbing in the fact that he's so chummy with Rick that he even had the privilege of seeing time travel stuff. A funny nod to one of the show's rules that time travel is off the table, which is why Rick's box of time travel stuff is always shelved in the background. They only bent this rule once in the snake episode, and even then, it was the snake. Morty calls out Evil Morty for getting under his skin and wanting to replace him, which once again causes a bit of that student-mentor dynamic to pop out, as Evil Morty views Morty's outward jealousy as a weakness. Even though Evil Morty is just as jealous, he's just trying to disguise it with his brash attitude. Evil Morty even vocalizes the idea of stealing Rick, but tries to cover his ass by claiming it's not because he loves Rick, it's because Morty does. When in reality, I do think Evil Morty is obviously growing attached to Rick, and perhaps to an extent truly does love him. Evil Morty is developing familial love towards Rick, which totally tracks because, despite all his shortcomings, he is the Rick that any Morty would want. The one who gives a damn, who actually cares. We know Rick loves the whole family, but I think it's indisputable that he cares for Morty the most, as this particular Morty is the only one Rick's lived with and has stuck by the longest, whereas everyone else in the Smith family aren't the same ones he started with, but he still loves them all universally. His Beth died young. The Beth, Summer, and Jerry in the Prime universe got cooked, and the current Jerry came from a mix-up at the Jerry Burrie. Morty Prime is the only one that stayed the same since day one, and thus, I think he'd be devastated, if not broken beyond repair, if something ever happened to him. Not to mention all the times where Rick has made sacrificial plays for Morty and the whole family, which is an odd thing for a Rick to do. This level of attachment is something Evil Morty thought wasn't even possible from a Rick. To be so insanely smart and powerful, but still care for other people that aren't yourself. Now that he knows that kind of Rick is out there, I think it's inevitable for him to suddenly start entertaining the idea of a life where he grew up with this Rick. Evil Morty couldn't help but to ask, what if? And so, he pulled the trigger and started manipulating Rick into going on regular adventures with him. And even though he would never admit it, Rick definitely started to enjoy spending time with Evil Morty because he is intellectually stimulating. It's not that he prefers Evil Morty over our Morty, or that he wants Morty to change, it's just a breath of fresh air for him. But even with all of Evil Morty's layers, the kid's still a murderous psychopath who sees everyone but our Rick as beneath him. So Rick knows this is doomed to be a toxic relationship that can't last for long. Lest Evil Morty get the family killed, killed and try to rope Rick into some real sinister stuff. So when Evil Morty returns to his lair, he finds it completely trashed by Rick, who destroyed the Omega device on the way out. How? By putting the plans for the Omega device inside of it. That's actually pretty genius, I can't lie. I'm both underwhelmed and relieved that we're done with the Omega device. Underwhelmed because, while I'm glad it didn't stick around for the long haul, I always thought they'd at least have it play a big part in one more episode before it was destroyed. So having it present for one scene and then it's gone when we're not looking feels a little cheap. I get they needed something for Evil Morty to blackmail Rick with though. As for why I'm glad they seem to be done with this device, it's a bit of a basic idea for such a high concept show. It serves as a fine explanation for why Diane is gone and can never come back, but it didn't really feel appropriate to have it as a looming threat when you know there's no shot they're going to kill off any of the family without it being undone at some point. Plus, Evil Morty himself didn't come up with it. I'd much rather have the endgame of wherever they take his character involve something he made himself as a multiverse-ending threat than something Rick Prime made. As Rick smashes through space-time and retreats to the bunker dimension, he goes on a tangent about Evil Morty where you can really feel his frustration.
That overconfident little bitch! Predictable bitch!
He already hates someone proudly displaying that they have the upper hand over him, but for it to be a Morty has to sting, if only because it's usually the other way around. Rick's also really bothered by the fact that Morty got dragged into everything, and that Evil Morty flaunted their friendship in his face. As Rick clearly doesn't want to have a conversation where he explains why he enjoys hanging out with Evil Morty without making Morty feel inadequate. Despite the greater spectacle of the first half, animation-wise at least, the second half of this episode is where things really shine, as the family gets involved with Rick and Evil Morty's breakup. There's one joke I really like because of how it characterizes Evil Morty without him even needing to be on screen, and that's his apparent weakness.
If he corners you, yell a slur. A bad slur.
What?
That reaction exactly.
The idea of Evil Morty, despite all of his villainy, would still be stun-locked and offended by the family slinging any slur at him reinforces that he is still Morty, no matter how much he tries to act like he's transcended above normal human emotions. He's a teenager who's just as vulnerable as the rest of us. I'm also a big fan of Bunker Gene. Give it up for Bunker Gene, people. Bunker Gene, no! While waiting for Evil Morty, our Morty asked Rick if he wishes his grandson was smarter, highlighting his insecurities, and where I think they may be taking Morty for the next season or so when it comes to his relationship with Rick. I think we're going to see Morty try to apply himself more academically and try to improve his intellect, aiming to stand on his own and impress Rick. Or he'll take a shortcut with a gadget that can expand his brain and have it backfire horrifically. Evil Morty arrives and a big battle breaks out. During this showdown, Evil Morty is still putting his best foot forward to make Morty jealous and steal Rick away, exposing his own flaws in the process. Evil Morty asserts that he doesn't need to be special, that he doesn't need approval, or to be praised for being different, which feels like him overcompensating, but I'll let you be the judge. Sound off on your own take in the comments. Rick and Evil Morty's brawl is balls to the walls insanity. It's hype, it's goofy, they really throw everything at the wall here. The reason why I think they gave us all this spectacle is because this might be the last Evil Morty episode that focuses on his relationship with Rick specifically. So they went all out. Moving forward, they'll be focusing on the dynamic between the two Mortys and really hashing that out. To me, it feels like the whole show is leading up to Morty being the one who deals with Evil Morty for good in order to service his own arc, which is Morty becoming secure of himself, learning to not change himself in order to win over the respect and admiration of others. You'd think the most satisfying part of this episode would be Morty calling out his evil variant's jealousy towards the duo, a jealousy that Evil Morty confirms by running away and hijacking the house's defense systems instead of engaging in the conversation any further. But what really hit for me was the rest of the family wailing on Evil Morty once he goes inside. He was so caught up in just Rick and Morty that he forgot about everyone else, something that Rick and Morty themselves would have never done. Evil Morty gets out of this ass beating by whipping out a time device based off the one he referenced Rick showing him earlier. It seems like fair game, only for Rick to be playing 4D chess the whole time, as Shevot's time travel ends up being Evil Morty's undoing, attracting the fourth dimensional time police who hadn't been seen since season 4's Rattlestar Rick Lactica. The feds pack up Evil Morty, and before the mastermind is sent to the interdimensional Stony Baloney, Morty gives him a good slap for the road, finally seeing Evil Morty for the jealous brat that he is. Though Morty still lacks the reassurance that Rick likes him more than Evil Morty, which again, I think will lead to something in future episodes. The post-credit scene features Evil Morty in time prison, which has comically normal prison cells, something even Evil Morty points out.
Y'all gonna be eating mush on a tray with like big aggro dudes that call you fish relentlessly.
You know what they say, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. So, in conclusion, was Evil Morty ruined? Nah, but I do feel like there's an episode missing here. Like, we should have had Evil Morty come back one more time to have Rick and Morty do a favor for him, give us a little bit of Rick and Evil Morty hitting it off, and then we can have this episode where we learn that Rick and Evil Morty kept hanging out off screen. But in terms of characterization and development, all of this does track to me. Evil Morty's whole worldview was proven incorrect, and it's causing him to reassess what he wants out of life. What he wants his relationship with Rick to look like. It just happened a little fast, and I can see why people think it feels out of character. And that feels like a good place to pass the mic over to you. What did you think about this episode? What are your thoughts on Evil Morty's return and defeat? What do you want to see happen in his next arc? Let's get a dialogue going in the comments below, and keep it going by giving me a follow over on Twitter and Instagram at offscreen and at Roundtable Vids. Support us for just $1 over on Patreon, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit a like and subscribe to the Roundtable with notifications on so you never miss a video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an awesome day. Peace!
What we do here is go back.
Need something to throw on while you draw, study, or sleep? Roundtable Rewind's got you covered. So why not take a stroll down memory lane and subscribe?
No one can tell me what to do.
See you there. Craving something new in the indie scene?
Well, if you're all gonna be such critics, why don't you suggest a better one?
It's great to have so many serialized comedy dramas, but what if we just went all in on the laughs and feel good vibes?
Move on up out of my way. I have something gotta do today. Got no time for all your games.
But I like the way you like to play. You sure you're having a moment to pay some mind to someone who could spend some time with you one day.
Right now, my homie Toonrific Tariq is funding the pilot for his adult animated romance comedy, Hey. It's shaping up to be one of the most unique shows in the indie scene.
That's what everybody wants, a straight couple.
You can be a part of animation history by heading to the Kickstarter and becoming a backer by June 10th, 2026. The Kickstarter page also gives you the 411 on the show, the characters, the crew, and more. Check it out by clicking the link in the description.
I want to create a show that the culture is proud to call its own. I want to create Hey, and I want you to help.
Adults love it.